Hello everyone, we're back continuing our journey in the Arab-Israeli conflict, and today we're going to get into the biggest things of the conflict that many of us know about or always hear about, and that's war. Now, we already talked about the 1948 and 49 war, the War of Independence, and that would be followed up by just a few short years after by the 1956 Suez War. And you actually had a little bit of aggression on both sides here. In 1956, the Egyptians are going to close the Suez Canal to Israel. Now, this is huge economically, and remember we said economics is going to play a large factor in this war. If you look on the picture of the left, that is the Suez Canal. That's what it looks like. It's very large. If you look at the mouse, this is a U.S. aircraft carrier, so this is not a small stretch of water. But what that does is that allows someone to go from the Red Sea directly into the Mediterranean Sea. This is huge for trade. This is how you get shipping. This is how you bring in products. And if you can't go through the Suez Canal, you have to go over the entirety of Africa. And so just to give you an idea, if you were coming from Mumbai, which is a major trading port, to go around Africa to get to London, for instance, it's 12,000 miles. But if you cut through, it's only 7. You're saving money on fuel and all that type of stuff. And this was clearly a way for the Egyptians to try to get back, if you will, at the Israelis. Well, the Israelis were having none of it, so as a result, they would invade the Sinai Peninsula. For those of you that don't know, the Sinai Peninsula is this strip of land here, if you look at the mouse on the right, that connects Israel to Egypt. And it had been traditionally Egyptian for, 8,000 years at that point. And so the Israelis are going to come in and attack Egypt. Egypt will also counterattack. And as you can see here, you've got lots of troop movements, you've got tanks, you've got planes bombing areas in Egypt. What also made this war intense is it was also part of the Cold War. The U.S. was supporting Israel, and Russia was supporting Egypt. So that just kind of intensified the conflict and also gave both sides the resources to fight it. Now, eventually, it's going to kind of grind down, and the UN is going to come in and help get an armistice signed. Again, an armistice is not a treaty, but it's like, okay, we'll stop fighting. Now, the reason why I have ending question marks here is that even though the fighting ended and the canal was reopened, the Egyptians are going to continue to be angry because the Israelis are going to hold on to the Sinai Peninsula. They're going to occupy it here. Now, there's not a lot of stuff in the Sinai Peninsula. It's mostly desert and rock, but it's the idea that gives them a strategic advantage, and perhaps if the canal gets closed, that they can attack again. So in a way, you kind of have an uneasy truce, if you will, that will last about 11 years. But in those 11 years, you would get some little border skirmishes until finally war breaks out again in 1967. And guys, this is probably the most significant war that has long-lasting impact. What was going to happen, if you will, is that the Arab nations of Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt were all preparing to attack Israel. Now, Israel finds out this information and attacks them first, which is a brilliant move. It actually catches the Arabs off guard, and the Israelis are going to be able to expand. And this is the big deal. If you look at the map on the left, so you have this light green area was modern Israel, Gaza and the West Bank, Gaza under control of Egypt, the West Bank under control of Jordan. And it's all pretty much completely occupied by Palestinians. What's going to happen for Israel after this Six-Day War in 1967 is they're going to firmly entrench themselves in Egypt. They're going to take over Gaza. They're going to take over the West Bank. And they're going to take over the Golan Heights, this area up here. Again, it's called the Golan Heights. You definitely want to know that. Which also had large water supplies. So now you have Israel expanding, which for them is smart. You need to solidify your borders. But the long-term problem that's going to start to develop here is that both Gaza and the West Bank are now completely under control of Israel. Before they were kind of under nominal control and they were almost like a country within a country. Well, now they've been absorbed. And this is what is going to make a lot of people upset, in that they're now ruled, being the Palestinians, by Israel, and they have no say in their government. And it's going to lead to some problems long term. But for Israel, this was a huge sweeping win and really put them in a position of strength. Of course, it's also going to make them a target because it's not too much longer that there's another war called the Yom Kippur War. In 1973, Israel will be attacked on its holiest holiday, Yom Kippur. They were definitely taken off guard, and they were attacked pretty much everywhere. They were attacked by Egypt and Syria, and they were getting hit very, very hard. Actually, up here, they were almost driven into the sea, if you will, and their forces were really stretched out. Something very interesting here, though, is that Jordan this time, even though there were some troops coming out of their nation, really run by Syria, they don't attack, which we'll talk about later because Jordan has worked out some peace treaties with Israel after this war. Nonetheless, the Israelis are able to actually rally and push out the Arab nations. So once again, they do win. However, the Arabs respond in a very interesting way. You learned about this in your U.S. History 2 classes, that the following year, 1974-1975, would be the Arab oil embargo. So against Israel and its allies, the United States being one, there would be massive oil shortages and the price of oil would go through the roof, effectively tanking the economy. In the United States, for instance, it's actually one of the reasons that Gerald Ford would end up losing to Jimmy Carter in the election of 1976 because you still felt the aftermath of that. And that economy in the United States would actually go on a downturn really from 1974-75 all the way to about 1981-82. So in Israel, this really hurt them as well. And so now the Arabs are looking at different types of responses. Now, you're going to have a large break before the next large-scale war because at this point, terrorism is really going to kind of be the major conflict. Now, we're going to talk about that in a separate video, but everything is still going to be on ease. But the Arabs have lost so many wars at this point that what we're going to end up seeing is Arabic nations start to make peace treaties with Israel, or some nations will just kind of do a political route because Israel have been so successful militarily. The Israelis would also be in the Gulf War, and this is a great example of how they had become a target. The Gulf War, again, we'll get into it really briefly, was when the United States went into Iraq to get them out of Kuwait when they had invaded in 1991. But Iraq, instead of just fighting us, used these missiles on the right. This is called a Scud missile, which was a short-range missile, to attack Israel. As we see here, this is just a part of the city of Tel Aviv. And if you want to know why Israel's always on edge, they absolutely have a right to be. Israel really wasn't involved in this war. They weren't having anybody fight in this war, yet they became a target because of these long-lasting hatreds. Now, the most recent big war, even though you had fighting in Gaza recently, which we'll talk about later, was the Gaza War that lasted from December of 2008 to January of 2009. As I said, one of the big problems that you have developing throughout this particular time period was terrorists coming in and out of the West Bank and Gaza Strip, attacking areas in Israel. And Israel had some intelligence where they felt that there were certain terrorist groups within the Gaza Strip. So in December of 2008, they enacted Operation Cast Lead, which were strategic air attacks by fighter jets and helicopters trying to attack what they felt were facilities run by terrorists. Now, the problem you have with this is hundreds of civilians are going to be hit by this war because you see, this is just like a city. And so this is a massive explosion that this actually hit a rocket factory using rockets against Israel, but there's always this collateral damage. The terrorist group Hamas will then respond, because they work out of Gaza, with rocket attacks into Israel, forcing Israel to actually invade. Then you got terrorist groups that got involved, groups like Hezbollah and Al Qaeda, even though the Palestinians were urging terrorist groups to stay away because they themselves were trying to actually get this to all stop. Now, eventually, some humanitarian aid was brought into Gaza to try to calm the war down, because so many civilians were being killed and of the massive destruction that was what was had. A agreement is going to be eventually reached in 2009. The war itself will end. Israel would have 13 deaths, but the Palestinians would have around 1,400 deaths. And there's lots of impacts here, because Hamas also controls the Israeli government, which, well, not the Israeli government, the Palestinian government. They have like a terrorist group and non-terrorist group that both call themselves Hamas. I will explain that in a later video. So there's a lot of tension there. Periodically, Israel, when they have intelligence, will attack areas in Gaza that they feel are being run by terrorists. And on the flip side, there's them big kidnappings of Israeli soldiers. In 2011, a ship headed to Gaza was attacked by Israel and destroyed, and a couple workers on the ship were killed, and later on it was found out to actually be an aid ship that was just carrying food and medicine. And so you get a lot of chaos here, because unfortunately in Palestine, or the area that is referred to as Palestine, West Bank, Gaza Strip, doesn't have a lot of control. But the big thing that you're going to see here that we're going to talk about on the next video is this loss of land of Palestine. Here it was in 1946. Here, the next one where the mouse is, you have the plan. And then from 1946 to 1949 to 67, you had these areas. But then when they take them over after the Six-Day War, Gaza has always been very strong, but then Israel is going to start to settle. This is a big deal. What's going to happen is the Israelis are going to send settlers into what areas that were supposed to be for Palestinians and start having people set up there. And as you can see from, this is the West Bank over here, this is what it is today. There's very little land for the Palestinians, and unfortunately, because of this expansion of land, which wasn't supposed to happen, you get a lot of tension. Now, three nations they really haven't fought a war with in a long time, Syria, Lebanon, and Iran, to finish this up. These are all nations that do not like Israel and have often either aided terrorists or harbored terrorists. And we're going to be talking about this moving forward with the terrorist groups, because Israel is always ready for war, particularly with Iran. This is the Iranian flag over here. And with Iran starting to grow in power, with the possibility of getting nuclear power, Israel is very much on high alert. Even though they have never actually fought a direct war with Iran, Iran has always professed basically their hatred for Israel, along with Syria and Lebanon professing that hatred. And so Israel is in this constant state of war readiness. And that's what I want you to understand, why it's so stressful, why it's so dangerous. They're not always fighting a war, but they always have to be ready. And that's what puts them on edge, and rightfully so. So hopefully you learned a lot about this ongoing conflict and why there's always this much tension, because of the history of so much war in such a short period of time. All right, guys, I'll see you tomorrow, and we'll talk about this video.